This Yuletide Miniseries is a replay of episodes originally published in 2024. This way, the episodes are conveniently queued up in your podcast player so you don't have to go searching for them, and you never lose your spot in the listening order. As always, we're celebrating Yuletide in real time in the Numinous Network. I hope you'll join us for daily altar time from 10 to 10:30 a.m. Pacific, starting December 21st, winter solstice, and going through till New Year on January 1st. We're gathering on Zoom to check in, light our candles, and do a 20-minute guided trance journey to connect with the Yuletide theme of the day. So join us in the Numinous Network for Yuletide. Sign up at carmenspaniola.com. Welcome to the seventh day of Yuletide, when we give attention to balance and harmony, particularly with our kin, siblings, and family, both chosen family and blood relatives. Many observances around Yuletide highlight mythologies about twins or siblings and stories about the balance of equals. They explore the tension and the balance of binaries, such as lightness and darkness, or masculine and feminine, or physical and spiritual. If it fits our situation, we can take these stories to heart when it comes to family relations. We can hear them as literal calls to reconcile with siblings, since life is short and capricious. Or we can extend these stories as metaphor to account for any people in our milieu that we wouldn't necessarily choose to be connected to, but ultimately are as fellow travelers on the planet at this time. The point is, as we close in on the final days of the year, we are trying to end well. These are the days of taking care of old business, becoming current in our relationships as we grapple with the complex negotiations of balancing our need to honor ourselves and our values with our duty of care to each other despite our differences. This is the time of year to acknowledge how we are bound to each other in our struggles, even when we're on opposite sides of the struggle. It's the struggle that binds us. And differences are good, but in order to have balance, we must also have equity and equality. So the question we sit with today is, how can we find better balance? When and where must we relinquish and let go of power so there can be better balance in our lives? When and where must we become more engaged with the struggle for equality and equity? How do we become big enough and rooted enough to be able to hold the tension of opposites while working towards more safeness and more grace for everybody? Our theme for the spirit of Yuletide this year in the Numinous Network has been Rooted in Grace, a short phrase that seeks to capture a feeling of being both grounded and extending ourselves in compassionate connection to others. Grace in this context is about giving ourselves a break and not beating ourselves up if we are stretched to the limits of our capacity and if we simply can't offer more of ourselves or can't meet someone's need, but also endeavoring to give other people the benefit of the doubt, to recognize their struggles and their limitations, and that they perhaps can't meet our need. Being rooted in grace is about orienting towards others and ourselves with compassion, understanding, tender-heartedness, mercy, expansiveness, care, and gentleness. So you may not feel able to reconcile or reach out or really even see someone else's point of view right now, and it may really hurt if they can't see yours. This predicament can be so painful. And while we are bound to one another as humans caught in difficult histories and in systems of power and dominance, we are also just little mammals trying to make it through the day. It's a difficult balance that requires gentleness, attunement, and a certain amount of go with the flow. It's just not sustainable to always be locked in battle, to be caught in the power struggle between light and dark, good and evil, right and wrong. Sometimes it's best to pause and regroup. My spiritual mentor and friend, the late Chief Leonard George, once said to me, "Carmen, sometimes when the river is rapid, you just have to pull the canoe ashore." Meaning sometimes you do need to take a break, catch your breath, step back, and reevaluate. Maybe today, as you listen to these myths, you take a sacred pause. Find some balance, perhaps with your breath to help you, or with today's meditation. What is it like for you to imagine receiving grace, receiving the benefit of the doubt and care and tenderheartedness? In the places in your life where you are locked in conflict, competition, or struggle for power, what higher principles sustain you? How can you find better balance? Where can grace come in to benefit you and others? Many ancient mythologies feature a brother and sister pair representing the balancing energies of the active and receptive principles. Freyr and Freya, Apollo and Artemis are some examples that come to mind. These sibling pairs often make an appearance sometime near winter solstice, the still point when we are balanced between light and dark. When it comes to Yuletide traditions featuring the balance of binaries, the Swedish really have this genre nailed with their reverence of Freyr and his sister Freya. Their names have etymological roots meaning the fruitful, and each is celebrated as a representative of both war and peace, pleasure and fierceness. They are the children of Njord and his unnamed sister. So apparently incest was kind of common among this rank of gods. So Freyr and Freya are a brother and sister that come from a brother and sister. So not a cute look, but I think it really seals their status as the ultimate sibling pair duo. If you and your sibling are close, you probably have lots of ways to highlight that on your altar today. But if you're not that close or even estranged, you might write the names of Freyr and Freya on a piece of paper or use some of their symbols to represent your acknowledgement that somewhere out there is someone who shares some of your DNA, whose story entwines with yours, at the very least in a mystical sense, if not on an ordinary daily basis. Freya and Freyr each have their own pig symbolism. One of Freyr's names was Gallenbursti, which means the boar with golden bristles. In this form, he could run across the sky faster than any horse and is so brilliant it is never dark where he is. One of Freya's names was Hildsvini. Let me try that again. One of Freya's names was Hildsvini, the battle swine. Very often, Freyr and Freya are depicted as wild boars or pigs, and eating of this meat at the Yule feast was likened to partaking of the gods themselves, much like the Christians take the Eucharist as the body of Christ. In Valhalla, the war dead feast on the meat of an ever-renewing boar, again referring to the everlasting life offered by Freyr and Freya to those who sacrifice themselves in war. Pig symbolism continues today in Norway and Sweden and other parts of Northern Europe, where you would find if you find an almond in your traditional rice pudding at Yuletide, you receive a lucky marzipan pig as a sign of good fortune. And that's why those little marzipan pigs appear in your local German candy shops and delis at this time of year. Sealing their strange power couple status, Freyr and Freya are also symbols of wealth and fertility. Those attributes were represented by their depictions as oxen, bull, and cow, and with the color black. In ancient Europe, the color black was not particularly associated with death as it is now, but instead it was associated with soil and earth and fecundity, and in that way also connected to fertility. So when we see bovines or the color black, both are actually ancient symbols that honor the rebirth aspect of the life and death binary. So you could choose to honor cycles of dying and rising as a form of balance today. There are plenty of myths that feature a boar killing the male companion of a fertility goddess. This is an old version of the classic myth of the death of a sacrificial king, not entirely unlike Jesus. For instance, another brother-sister romantic couple, Isis and Osiris, are central to the ancient Egyptian myth that some scholars say is the template for early Christianity. Can you imagine with your, ew. Okay. Osiris, the god of order, is killed by Seth, the god of disorder, who in some versions of the myth then transforms himself into a wild boar. Osiris is eventually regenerated by Isis, and as such becomes the god of resurrection. In ancient Babylon, Queen Ishtar tells her worshippers that when her son Tammuz was killed by a wild pig, some of his blood fell on the stump of an evergreen tree. That stump grew into a full new tree overnight, so the blood as Tammuz makes the evergreen more sacred after that. In ancient Phoenicia and later Greece, we hear the tale of Adonis, another dying and rising demigod, who lived a third of the year in the underworld and the rest of the year among humans earthside. Adonis himself exemplifies the balance of binaries because he's described as acting like a man in his affections for Aphrodite, but like a woman in his affections for Apollo. And he too was eventually killed by a wild boar. So lots of lessons here about pigs. Not to be trifled with, kind of a big deal at Yuletide. And pigs also very much an all-rounder when it comes to representing the balance of binaries, death and resurrection, and sacred sacrifice. If the themes I've shared so far don't really resonate, because that would be a very specific circumstance, I think, if they did resonate, you could also choose to honor Loki today. It's debated whether Loki was gender fluid or trans, but the sagas tell of him as appearing as a man, but also as a woman and childbearer with male pronouns. Now, aside from being the son of a frost giant, Loki's connection with Yuletide is kind of a tad unfortunate because he is the one who masterminds the killing of beloved Balder the Beautiful by poisoning him with mistletoe. In that myth, though, Balder, who actually, sidebar, in the period of the Viking conversion to Christianity, was sometimes called the White Christ. Balder is eventually resurrected after the Norse apocalypse, and Balder rules over a new, more peaceful world. So, in some ways, it's kind of how Loki's trickster persona balances out the strict order of the universe with just like a little chaos. And then that cycles into a whole new world order. So let's not forget that Loki does a fair bit more good than bad in the sagas generally. So we could just read him as a complex figure, carrying both lightness and darkness within, almost like a bridging character between humans and gods. In Irish mythology, the Holly King and the Oak King are brothers whose constant struggle between them signifies the wax and wane of the seasons. They each rule over half the year, and they fight for the favor of the goddess. They come together to lay down their differences and feast together for one night at the turning points of the year between light and dark. As the year succumbs to cold, stark wintertime, the Green Man cedes to the Holly King. As we turn again towards the light, we rejoice that the Oak King, the Green Man, is winning again. They'll meet again at midsummer, the midpoint of the year, celebrated on this seventh night of Yule, which is associated with the seventh month of the year, July. So think back to June 21st, midsummer, and throughout July, whatever your summer traditions might be, you could place a nod to them on your altar. Maybe you really engage with this ritual theme and actually call your sibling today, or you connect with whoever you consider to be your counterpart, the yin to your yang, the ebb to your flow, the Laverne to your Shirley, the sun to your moon. Or you could simply place a sprig of holly and some oak leaves on your altar, or some other complementary pair of symbols that signify harmony, balance, and the moderating quality of mirrored energies. Maybe raise a toast to Freyr and Freya to help wash down a ham sandwich today, and definitely consider enjoying marzipan pigs or rice pudding after supper.